Hello, my friends. Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. It helps more than you know. I used to think that buying a house was the ultimate sign of finally getting my life together. A milestone. Something solid, stable, rooted. I grew up in rentals where the walls were thin and the ceiling stained, places where neighbors fought loudly and strangers loitered at night. Owning a house always sounded like peace. It wasn't. Last year, after a decade of saving every extra dollar and living as cheaply as I could, I bought my first home, a small two-story place in a quiet Pennsylvania suburb. Built in the 1940s, modest, a little worn but charming in its own way. It was the kind of neighborhood where people walked their dogs at dusk and waved even if they didn't know you. The kind of place where you don't expect anything bad to happen. I still remember the first time I stepped inside after signing all the paperwork. The air felt heavier than I expected, like the house had been sealed shut for a long time. But that's normal in old homes, I told myself. Houses that sit empty for months collect a certain stillness. I didn't notice anything unusual that first day, except for the basement door. It was the only part of the house that seemed wrong. It was an old wooden door built into the hallway wall just off the kitchen. The house inspector told me the basement itself was fine, dry, structurally sound, but the door didn't look fine at all. Deep scratches ran along the lower half, some wide and jagged, some thin like they were made with a knife. Not the kind of scratches you get from moving furniture, more like something clawed at it over and over for years. The inspector shrugged when I pointed it out. "Old houses have stories," he said. "Probably an old dog." But the scratches weren't shaped like paw marks. They were too long, too straight, too desperate. I should have walked away right then. The first few nights, nothing happened. I slept on a mattress on the floor with unpacked boxes stacked around me. The house creaked a lot, but old houses do that. Every sound was something I could blame on pipes or floorboards or wind. It wasn't until the fourth night that I woke up to the unmistakable sound of footsteps downstairs. At first, I thought it was someone outside, but no, these weren't muffled or distant. They were inside the house, slow and deliberate, crossing the kitchen. I held my breath. Another step, then another. The steps stopped right outside my bedroom door. I waited for the knob to turn. My mind raced through every possibility. Intruder, leftover worker with a spare key, maybe someone had been living in the basement. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. The knob never turned. Eventually, I worked up the courage to swing my legs out of bed quietly and grab the baseball bat I'd leaned against the wall. I crept to the door and pulled it open fast, ready to swing. There was nothing there. I checked every room upstairs. Nothing. Then I checked the entire downstairs. Nothing. The basement door was closed, and something about that made my hands shake. I didn't open it. I couldn't. Not alone. Not in the middle of the night. I told myself it had just been the house settling. Maybe the sound was traveling through vents. Maybe my half-asleep brain exaggerated footsteps. I convinced myself. Until it happened again the next night, and the night after that. And then the basement door started to open on its own. It didn't slam open dramatically. It didn't creak open like in a movie. It was always just slightly ajar in the morning, wide enough for a hand to slip through. I would double latch it every night. There were 2 locks, top and bottom, but in the mornings, one lock would be undone. Sometimes both. I changed the locks. It still happened. I nailed the door shut. By the next morning, the nails were lying on the floor. That was the moment I realized I was dealing not with an intruder, but with something inside the house. Still, I didn't leave. People always say, "Why don't you just move?" as if it's that easy. I had put every dollar I had into that house. I couldn't afford to abandon it. Besides, part of me needed to understand what was happening. I needed answers. The turning point came 2 weeks later. I'd fallen asleep on the couch with the TV on when I woke up to the sound of humming. A woman's voice, soft but clear, coming from somewhere behind the kitchen. It wasn't a song I recognized, but the melody was slow and sad, like a lullaby sung decades ago. It drifted down the hallway, too real to be a dream. The humming was coming from the basement. I froze. I didn't move, didn't breathe, barely blinked. The voice went on for at least 30 seconds, then stopped abruptly, as if whoever was humming suddenly realized I was awake. And then the footsteps started again, ascending the basement stairs. My entire body turned cold. I grabbed my phone and called 911, whispering that someone was in my house. The operator told me to stay somewhere safe and wait for the police. The footsteps reached the basement door. I stared at the door from across the living room, expecting it to open, expecting to see someone or something step out. But nothing happened. The police arrived 10 minutes later. They searched the entire house while I stayed outside under the porch light, shaking so hard I almost dropped my phone. An officer eventually came out and told me there was no one inside. He also told me something else. "You know there's a room down there, right?" he asked. "What room?" "In the basement. A small one in the back. The door was stuck, but we forced it open. Old storage room, maybe?" Except I'd been in the basement before, twice. There was no extra room. The basement was one open space, no walls, no doors. But when the police took me downstairs, sure enough, there was a narrow wooden doorway at the far end. The door was splintered from where they had forced it. Inside was a tiny room, maybe 6 feet by 6 feet, with walls made of old cement and no windows. It smelled like rot and damp earth. A single wooden chair sat in the center of the room, facing the wall. And carved into that wall were hundreds of lines, tally marks etched deep like someone had scratched them with something sharp. Days, months, years? I don't know. The police found nothing else. No signs of recent activity, no fingerprints except mine from touching the doorknob. They left with a polite but dismissive tone, as if I had wasted their time. But something changed after that night. The house got louder. Every day around 3 a.m., the same sequence repeated itself. Footsteps in the kitchen, then in the hallway, then outside my bedroom door. They never went farther, never tried to open the door, but they were always there, as if the thing in the house was learning the boundaries of where it could go. Then objects started moving, not thrown across the room, just shifted slightly. My toothbrush moved from the sink to the bathtub edge. A cup I left in the kitchen ended up on the stair landing. My bedroom window opened in the middle of the night, even after I latched it. I installed cameras that covered the living room, kitchen, and hallway. 2 nights later, I finally caught something. At exactly 3:02 a.m., the camera in the kitchen glitched, just a quick distortion. But during that split second, a shadow appeared. Not a person, not an intruder. A tall, thin silhouette that stretched too high for a normal human shape. The shadow stood near the basement door. Then the camera went back to normal. I quit sleeping after that. I stayed awake until exhaustion knocked me out, but every time I slept, the same dream came. Someone standing at the foot of my bed. I could never see their face, just the outline of a woman with long hair, head tilted, watching me sleep. The dream always ended the same way. She leaned close and whispered, "Let me up." Not, "Let me out," "Let me up." I didn't understand what that meant until the night the floorboards in my bedroom began to shift. It happened at 3 a.m. again. I was awake, staring at the ceiling, and the boards near the foot of my bed made a cracking noise, and then another. Something was pushing up from underneath. I shot out of bed so fast I stumbled into the wall. The boards rose slightly, like something underneath them pressed a hand against the underside. I ran out of the room and slammed the door. By morning, the boards were back to normal. I finally decided to dig into the history of the house. I spent hours at the local library and the town records office, searching for anything that might explain what was happening. It didn't take long to find something. In 1964, a woman named Margaret Hale lived in my house with her teenage daughter, Ruth. Neighbors described the mother as reclusive, paranoid, and deeply religious. Her daughter rarely attended school. Local rumors said the mother believed the girl was possessed or marked, depending on who you asked. One night, both of them disappeared. The mother's car was gone, so police assumed they had left town. The house sat empty for nearly a year before being sold again. But the creepy part wasn't their disappearance. It was the fact that the basement room, listed in the earliest home inspection reports, didn't originally appear in any documentation after that. As if someone sealed it up, buried it, forgot it. I tried to convince myself that I wasn't in danger. After all, whatever was happening hadn't harmed me. Not physically, anyway. But then came the night when everything finally revealed itself. It started like every other night. Footsteps at 3 a.m., stopping outside my bedroom door. I stayed awake, frozen, clutching my phone. But then something new happened. The footsteps continued past my door, and then slowly, agonizingly, they began climbing the stairs to the attic. The attic I had never opened. The attic I had no reason to use. The attic that, according to the house's original drawings from the 1940s, should not have been big enough to walk in. My curiosity overpowered my fear. I grabbed the baseball bat and crept up the stairs. Each step felt like I was walking into a trap I'd set for myself. At the top was the narrow pull cord to open the attic hatch. I pulled it. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the ladder creaked down. Cold air rushed past me, colder than winter air. It smelled like old dirt and rust. I climbed up. The attic wasn't at all what it should have been. It was too big, stretching far into the darkness. The roof beams were warped, carved with symbols I didn't recognize. But the worst part was the far wall. Someone had drawn hundreds of pictures on it, charcoal drawings, childlike sketches. All of them showed the same thing, a girl standing at the bottom of a staircase, her arms reaching upward. The drawings varied in style and size, but every single one showed her looking up, like she was waiting for someone to help her climb, or like she wanted to climb up to them. My heart hammered as I moved closer. I scanned the drawings until one scribble near the center caught my eye, a depiction of the basement, the tiny room, the chair, the tallies on the wall, and beneath it, in shakily scrawled handwriting, "She won't stay down." I stumbled back, realizing the attic wasn't just storage, it was a warning. I scrambled down the ladder and raced to the basement door. I had to see for myself. I had to know what was happening in that house. The house felt alive as I descended the basement steps. Heavy air pressed on my chest. The room in the back looked even darker than before, as if light refused to enter it. I stepped inside. The chair in the center had moved. It now faced the doorway, like someone had been sitting in it, watching the basement, and the tallies on the wall. There were fresh ones, new lines carved over old ones, still flaking with pale gray dust on the floor. Something wanted me to know it was still here. I backed out slowly, refusing to turn my back on the room. I shouldn't have looked away. The instant I stepped into the main basement space, something grabbed my ankle. I crashed to the floor, hitting my head against the concrete, my vision blurred. But when I looked down, nobody was there. Yet the grip tightened, icy and unseen, pulling me toward the small room. I clawed at the floor, kicking, screaming, but it dragged me across the cold cement. My nails split against the ground. I felt myself being pulled into the darkness of the back room, the air chilling with every second. Then, just as suddenly, it let go. I scrambled to my feet, bolted up the stairs, slammed the basement door shut, and shoved every piece of furniture I could find against it. Something slammed once against the other side. Then, silence. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed awake until dawn, listening for any sound. As soon as the sun rose, I packed everything I could fit in my car and drove to a hotel, shaking uncontrollably the entire way. I never went back inside. I sold the house 6 months later at a massive loss. I told the realtor the plumbing had issues and the floors needed replacing. I didn't mention the basement. I didn't mention the drawings or the attic or the humming. I didn't mention the thing living in that house. Sometimes I still dream of the girl in the drawings. I see her standing at the bottom of the stairs looking up at me with dark, empty eyes. Sometimes I hear humming from nowhere, soft and slow, like the lullaby from that night. But the worst part is that even now, months later, every single night at exactly 3 a.m., I wake up without knowing why. And for one split second, I swear I hear footsteps right outside my bedroom door. And sometimes, I hear the floorboards shift, as if something underneath is still trying to come up. I never thought a house could watch you. Not figuratively, literally watch you. But after what happened in 2022, I don't doubt it for a second anymore. When I first moved into the house in Vermont, I thought I had finally found peace. A quiet neighborhood, a long driveway lined with maple trees, and a 2-story home with a porch that looked perfect for summer nights. I had no idea those trees had grown over soil, hiding things I should never have disturbed. The house had been vacant for 3 years before I bought it. The listing agent told me the previous owner had passed away, and his children wanted to sell quickly. The price was unbelievably low, but real estate had gotten weird after the pandemic, so I didn't question it. Maybe I should have. The first time I stepped through the front door, I felt something like a drop in temperature or pressure shifting in the air. It hit only for a second, almost like the house was taking a breath after being closed up too long. I brushed it off as my imagination and kept moving. I spent the first night sitting cross-legged on the hardwood floor, eating pizza from a box, my belongings still in the moving truck. The house was quiet, not peaceful quiet, but heavy quiet. Like every sound was being swallowed. Whenever I tried to listen closely, it felt like the silence was listening back. Around midnight, I heard a faint tapping above me. I assumed it was branches brushing the roof, but when I looked outside, the trees were still. No wind at all. The tapping continued in slow, irregular beats, and when I looked up, I realized it wasn't coming from above. It was coming from the attic. I told myself old houses make noises, but the tapping wasn't random. It was deliberate. 3 slow taps, a pause, then 2 taps, repeating, like a pattern, almost like a message. Still, I tried to sleep. The next day, I decided to check the attic. The entrance was a square cutout in the hallway ceiling with a pull-down ladder. I grabbed the cord, pulled, and the ladder came down stiffly. A rush of cold air drifted over me. The attic smelled like dust and old insulation. My phone flashlight barely cut through the darkness. I expected to see boxes or holiday decorations left behind, but the attic was completely empty, except for one thing. Someone had drawn an eye on the far wall. Not a cartoonish one, a hyper-detailed, realistic eye that took up nearly 3 feet of space. The iris was shaded meticulously, the eyelid wrinkled. The pupil was an unnervingly deep, dark circle, and the eye was positioned perfectly so that when you climbed the ladder and looked straight ahead, it stared at you. It looked fresh, like it had been drawn recently. My stomach twisted. I climbed down and closed the attic, trying to convince myself it was just some weird art project the previous owner left behind. But the eye stayed in the back of my mind all day, following me as I unpacked boxes and organized rooms. That night, the tapping returned. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps, exactly the same as before. I put headphones on and tried to sleep, but around 2 a.m., I woke up suddenly, heart racing. I wasn't sure why. The house was silent. Too silent. I sat up, listening. Then a soft creak came from the hallway. Then another. Someone, or something, was walking past my bedroom door. The footsteps weren't heavy like an intruder's. They were slow, barefoot, almost dragging. I held my breath, gripping my phone, ready to call the police. But the footsteps didn't continue down the hall. They stopped right outside my door. The floorboard sank slightly, the way it does when someone is standing still, waiting. I stared at the door for so long my eyes watered. After several minutes, the pressure on the floor eased, and the house went quiet again. I barely slept the rest of the night. The next morning, I checked the hallway. Nothing was disturbed. No footprints on the dusty floorboards. No sign anyone had been there. But the attic cord was swinging slightly, as if someone had just pulled it down and pushed it back up. I didn't go to the attic again. Over the next few days, the house started feeling different. I began noticing subtle changes. Doors slightly open when I knew I'd closed them, kitchen drawers misaligned, the bathroom mirror fogged as if someone had showered. One morning, I found muddy footprints in the kitchen. Small footprints, barefoot, too small to be an adult's. My throat tightened. The dirt trailed from the back door, but the door was locked, the dead bolt still in place. No signs of forced entry. That night, the tapping came again, but this time it wasn't from the attic. It was inside the walls, 5 feet from where I sat in the living room. I pressed my ear against the drywall, heart pounding. The tapping followed me. When I shifted right, it shifted right. When I stepped back, it grew fainter, like it was retreating deeper inside the wall. And then a whisper came through the drywall so soft I barely caught it. Here. I stumbled away so fast I nearly tripped over my own feet. The whisper wasn't angry or threatening. It was pleading, like someone begging to be noticed. I left the house that night and slept in my car in a grocery store parking lot. The next morning, I seriously considered breaking my lease, losing my deposit, and leaving forever. But something gnawed at me. Curiosity, maybe. Stupidity, definitely. I wanted to understand what was in that house. That afternoon, I visited the town records office. The clerk, a woman in her 60s with silver glasses, found the home's file. Built in 1971, she said, owned by the Hartsfields for 3 decades. I recognized the name. They were the family who had lived there before the most recent owner. I asked if anything unusual had happened to them. The clerk hesitated. "I'm not supposed to share details," she said. "But you're not the first person to ask about that property." I leaned closer. "What happened?" She lowered her voice. "The Hartsfields had a daughter. She went missing in 1987. They searched for weeks before authorities concluded she must have run off. The case went cold." I felt goosebumps crawl up my arms. "What was her name?" I asked. "Lila," she said, 13 years old. 13. The size of the footprints in my kitchen. I drove home slowly, dread building with every mile. When I pulled into my driveway, the house looked smaller somehow, like it was sinking into itself. The windows reflected the gray sky in a way that made them look like hollow eyes. When I stepped inside, the air felt dense and cold again, just like the first day. I walked through each room carefully. Everything seemed normal until I reached the living room. The wall where I had heard the whisper had changed. Someone had carved another eye into it, smaller than the one in the attic, but identical in style, perfectly identical. Same angle, same shading, same dark pupil. The house wasn't just watching me. It wanted me to watch back. My hands shook as I backed away. I thought about getting in my car and driving until I ran out of gas. But something in me, some awful, intoxicating urge, made me walk toward the attic ladder again. When I pulled the cord, dust rained down. The ladder unfolded, creaking like old bones. I climbed. The attic was still empty, but the giant eye on the wall had changed. The iris was brighter, wet-looking, fresh, as if drawn moments before. When I stepped closer, I noticed something else. Beneath the eye, carved faintly into the wood, was a phrase I hadn't seen before. "Let me out." The words were carved over and over again, each time shakier than the last, like someone had been scratching desperately until their hands gave out. I rushed back down, shutting the attic ladder so hard it nearly snapped. I don't know what I expected. Maybe the house to grow quiet, maybe everything to stop. But the opposite happened. That night, the footsteps were louder. They paced the hallway for hours, slow, dragging, unsteady, like someone who had forgotten how to walk properly. At 3:12 a.m., my bedroom doorknob turned. I sat up, adrenaline flooding my veins, but the door didn't open. The knob twisted right, then left, then right again. Slow, experimental. Learning, when it finally stopped, a soft knock followed. One single knock, then a whisper from the other side of the door. "Please, see me." I covered my ears, squeezing my eyes shut. The whisper came again, closer to the floor, like the speaker had crouched down. "Please, please." I didn't sleep. In the morning, I decided I was leaving. I threw clothes into bags, grabbed important documents, and stuffed whatever I could into my trunk. As I passed the hallway, I noticed the wall where the small eye had been carved. It wasn't just one eye now, there were dozens, all staring at me. I ran out the door and didn't look back. I rented an apartment 40 minutes away and tried to rebuild my life, but the nightmares didn't stop. I dreamed of the attic, the eyes, the footsteps, the tapping. A month later, I received a call from the realtor. She wanted to know if I still had the keys. "The new buyer's ready to move in," she said. I froze. "Someone bought the house?" I asked. "Oh yes, a family with a young daughter." A wave of nausea rolled through me. That night I dreamed of the missing girl, dreamed of her in the walls, tapping, whispering, dreamed of her in the attic, drawing the same eye over and over until her fingers bled. And when I woke up, heart pounding, I heard a soft tapping on the wall next to my bed. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps, just like before, just like home. I moved apartments again a week later, but it didn't matter. The tapping followed. Sometimes it comes from the ceiling, sometimes from the closet, sometimes from right behind where I'm sitting, like a small hand pressing against the wallpaper. And every now and then, when the tapping stops, a whisper slips through. "Here." I don't know how to make it stop. I don't know if it ever will. But I've learned something important. When a house watches you, it isn't because it wants to harm you. It's because something inside it wants you to see it. And once you do, it never lets you go. I should start by saying I never believed in haunted houses. Not really. I believed in old pipes, bad wiring, weird neighbors, and overworked imaginations. But I also believed in opportunity. And when I found the house in North Carolina, a 3-bedroom craftsman listed for way below market value, I thought I had stumbled onto the opportunity of a lifetime. Now, I know that some houses are cheap for a reason. When I first pulled into the driveway, the place looked normal enough. A wide porch, dark green siding, tall oaks in the backyard. The neighborhood was quiet, mostly retirees and a few families with kids who left toys scattered across their lawns. It felt safe, comfortable, like a place where nothing bad could possibly happen. Inside, the house still smelled faintly like the previous owner, a mix of lavender cleaner and cedar wood. Everything looked clean and freshly repainted. The hardwood floors were beautifully aged, and sunlight poured through the large living room windows in the late afternoon. But the upstairs hallway felt wrong. I can't describe it any better than that. The air felt heavy, like humidity without heat. The walls seemed darker than the rest of the house, even though the paint was the same light beige. The feeling didn't hit instantly. It crept up on me after I had walked the hallway twice, checking bedrooms and closets. By the 3rd pass, my skin tingled like I'd stepped under a too strong fluorescent light. There was a small door at the end of the hall, one that looked almost decorative. Waist-high, square, fitted with a simple knob. I assumed it was storage space under the roof, but when I tugged on the knob, the door didn't budge, locked. I figured the realtor must have misplaced the key, so I shrugged it off. Every old house has quirks. That night was my first night sleeping there. My furniture hadn't arrived yet, so I slept on an air mattress with a blanket and a single pillow. Around midnight, I woke up thirsty. When I walked into the hallway, the air felt colder than the rest of the house. I stood there for a moment. The small door at the end of the hall seemed darker, like it absorbed the moonlight instead of reflecting it. I walked past it quickly, went downstairs for water, and went back to bed telling myself I was just unsettled from the move. The next morning, the small door was unlocked. I stared at it for a long time, trying to remember if maybe I'd forgotten to check it thoroughly the day before. Maybe it had just been stuck. Maybe the latch was loose. But no, when I pulled it open, the old brass latch scraped cleanly and the door swung easily. Inside was a narrow triangular crawl space that extended about 10 feet. Dust floated in the slanted rays of sunlight that seeped through a small vent. And at the far end of the crawl space was a pile of objects. A small pile, carefully arranged, children's toys, a wooden block with faded red paint, a stuffed rabbit with one ear missing, a plastic race car with chipped blue enamel, all old, all worn, all placed neatly like someone had set them up for display. I felt a prickle run up my spine. I backed out, closed the door, and decided I would deal with it later. Maybe the previous owner had forgotten them. Maybe a kid used to live here. Maybe. But that night, I heard footsteps upstairs, light, quick, like a child running. I lay completely still on my air mattress as the sound traveled from one end of the hallway to the other, then stopped right outside my bedroom door. Silence pressed against the wood. Then, lightly, 2 knocks. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. In the morning, I told myself it was the house settling. Houses make noise, pipes expand, floorboards shift, old wood creaks. That's what people always say, right? But houses don't run. Houses don't knock. I spent the next few days trying to settle in, unpacking, cleaning, building furniture, and every day I found something new moved inside the crawl space. Sometimes the wooden block sat in a different spot. Sometimes the stuffed rabbit was turned toward the door, as if watching. By day 6, I started keeping track. I took pictures each morning, comparing them to the previous days. The toys moved a few inches each night, always closer to the entrance. One night I woke to the sound of laughter upstairs, a child's laugh, not cute, not innocent, not even joyful. It sounded strained, breathy, like someone trying to remember how laughing worked. I grabbed my phone and crept into the hallway. Everything was dark except for the faint light under the crawl space door. The crawl space door was open, wide open. The toys were no longer inside. They were scattered across the hallway floor in a trail leading toward the stairs, as if something had dragged them out one by one. I froze at the sight of them. Then I felt something cold brush the back of my neck. I spun around, but nothing was there. The air behind me felt heavy and wrong, like humidity mixed with dread. I backed into my bedroom and closed the door, heart hammering. I shoved a chair under the doorknob, even though the knob didn't lock. I didn't sleep. In the morning, the crawl space door was closed again. The toys were neatly piled inside, just like before, as if the night never happened. I left the house for the entire day, unable to stand being inside. I found a coffee shop in town and stayed there until the sun dipped low. The barista, a guy in his 20s with an easy smile, noticed I kept glancing at the clock. "New in town?" he asked. "Just moved," I said. "Bought the place on Horton Road." His face went still. "The Green Craftsman?" he asked quietly. I nodded. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he leaned closer. "You should get out of there." I swallowed. "Why?" He hesitated. "People don't stay long. 6 months tops. Some leave faster. Nobody lasts more than a year." "Why?" I pressed. "Is it unsafe?" He shook his head slowly. "Not unsafe, just wrong. People talk about noises, things moving, feeling watched. The last owner, he never slept upstairs. Said the house didn't want him there." I left the coffee shop with a pit in my stomach. When I got home, the house was silent at first. I walked upstairs cautiously. The crawl space door was open again, wider than before. This time I didn't go closer. I stayed 10 feet back, controlling my breathing. Then, a small hand reached out of the darkness. I ran downstairs so fast I nearly fell, grabbed my keys, and bolted to my car. I drove to a motel 20 minutes away and locked myself inside. I didn't return for 2 days. I considered calling the police, but what would I say? that a ghost child lived in my crawl space, they'd laugh. Or worse, they'd think I was unstable. Eventually, I forced myself to go back. I needed to gather clothes and essentials, maybe even figure out a way to sell the house quietly without drawing attention to whatever was happening. When I walked upstairs, the crawl space door was closed, but something new sat in front of it. A photograph. A printed photograph, old and faded. I picked it up with shaking hands. It showed a little girl, maybe 6 years old, standing on the porch of my house. Her hair was in braids and she wore a polka dot dress. She was smiling, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. On the back of the photo was a date from the 1980s, and beneath it, written in shaky pen, "Still here." My hands trembled so violently I dropped the picture. That's when the crawl space door began to open, slowly, deliberately, inch by inch. Something was pushing it from the inside. I stumbled backward until my spine hit the opposite wall. My breath came shallow and fast. The door opened fully. And from the darkness, something stepped forward. It wasn't the little girl in the photo. It was something shaped like her, small, thin, but wrong. Her limbs were too long for her frame. Her head tilted at an unnatural angle, like her neck hadn't fully learned how to hold it upright. Her eyes were dark and hollow, as if someone had scribbled them out. She stood at the entrance of the crawl space, staring at me. And then she smiled. The skin around her mouth stretched upward too far, as if pulled by invisible strings. Her teeth were too many, too sharp, too uneven. She took one step toward me, then another. Her bare feet made no noise on the wooden floor. I ran into the nearest bedroom and slammed the door, pressing my weight against it. There was no lock. I held it shut with everything I had. On the other side, silence. No footsteps, no breathing, nothing. Just a heavy stillness that made my skin crawl. Then a small voice came through the wood. "You found my toys." I felt tears sting my eyes. "This is my house," she whispered. Her voice shifted on the last word, deepening, layering, like several voices spoke at once. "My house." The temperature in the room plunged, my breath fogged. I grabbed the window, shoved it open, and climbed out onto the small roof above the porch. I jumped to the ground, scraping my arm badly, and sprinted to my car. I didn't look back. I didn't care what the neighbors thought. I drove until gas station lights blurred past me. I sat in the parking lot shaking, barely able to breathe. When I finally steadied myself enough to speak, I called a realtor and told her I needed to sell immediately. She asked if I wanted to discuss pricing. I hung up. I left everything inside, clothes, furniture, boxes, everything. I never returned. Someone else bought the house 2 months later, a family with 2 young kids. Sometimes I think about going back to warn them, but then I hear that voice in my dreams, the layered one whispering through the door. My house. And I wonder if leaving it behind was enough. Because last week, in my new apartment, I found something under my bed. A wooden block with faded red paint, the same one from the crawl space. And I swear, when I picked it up, I heard a small laugh behind me. I haven't slept since. I didn't believe in haunted houses. Growing up in Ohio, the only stories we heard were the kind teenagers told around bonfires, urban legends, exaggerated rumors, or the kind of nonsense your cousin swears happened to a friend of a friend. So when my wife and I bought our first home in rural Pennsylvania, an old colonial with a wide front porch and tall windows that stared down the long gravel driveway, I wasn't thinking about ghosts or curses or anything supernatural. I was thinking about finally having a place that was ours, a place to start our life. The house sat on a few acres of woods. It was cheap, suspiciously cheap, but the realtor blamed that on the remote location. People don't like being isolated anymore, she said. Everyone wants sidewalks and Starbucks. I didn't care. I liked the privacy. I liked the way the trees wrapped around the property and how quiet it felt out there. Too quiet, I would later learn. We moved in on a hot August morning. The air felt heavy, like the house had been holding its breath for a long time. The moment I stepped inside, I noticed a strange smell, faint, earthy, almost like damp soil. Not moldy, just wrong. My wife, Hannah, wrinkled her nose but didn't say anything. We were both too excited to nitpick. As the sun went down, we unpacked boxes in the living room. The house made normal old house sounds, creaks from settling wood, the occasional groan from the pipes. Nothing unusual. But around 10 p.m., while I was taping up flattened moving boxes, I heard something upstairs. A soft thump, like someone dropping a shoe. I paused and listened. Nothing. Probably something fell over in one of the bedrooms, but then I heard it again, a little louder, a deliberate sound, not random. "Did you hear that?" I asked Hannah. She looked up from the lamp she was assembling. "Hear what?" Another thump, this one more distinct, like a footstep. "That," I said. She frowned. "Probably the house settling." Maybe, but deep down, that explanation didn't feel right. Still, it was our first night there. We were exhausted. We went to bed around midnight. The bedroom was stuffy, so I cracked the window. I remembered lying there, half asleep, drifting. And then I heard it. Not in the house, but outside, under the window. Whispering. At first I thought it was the wind brushing through the trees, but the sound had rhythm. Pauses, inflection, the cadence of speech. I sat up slowly. Hannah was asleep, breathing softly beside me. The whispering stopped as soon as I moved. I listened for a long time. Nothing. Eventually, I convinced myself it was animals or the wind. It had to be. And I fell asleep. The next morning felt normal. Sunlight streamed through the windows. Birds chirped. I made coffee. For a few hours, I forgot all about the noise, until I noticed something outside. At the edge of the woods, facing the house, stood a man. He was about 50 feet away, wearing a dark jacket despite the heat. His posture was stiff, like he was standing at attention, and he wasn't moving, not even slightly. His face was oddly pale, almost gray. "Hannah," I whispered, "come here." When she walked over, I pointed. "Look," she squinted. "Where?" He was right there, standing by the trees." But the man was gone. No footsteps, no rustling, nothing. "Babe, you probably just saw a hiker," she said. Maybe, but the man hadn't looked like a hiker. He looked like someone watching. That night, the whispering came back. I closed the window, locked it, even shoved a towel at the bottom of the frame. But the whispering wasn't coming from outside this time. It was coming from the hallway. I grabbed my phone and quietly stepped outside the bedroom. The hall was dim, lit only by the small nightlight at the far end. The whispering stopped instantly, like it was aware of me. I stood there for almost a minute. Then, something cold brushed against the back of my neck. I spun around, heart hammering, aiming my phone flashlight into the dark. Nothing was there, but the air felt colder behind me than in front of me. I didn't sleep much after that. The next day, I found something strange in the basement. I'd gone down there to check the circuit panel because a few lights had begun flickering. The basement was big but unfinished, with dirt packed along the edges where the walls met the floor. Near the far wall, I noticed a thin crack. Not unusual, but something dark was seeping out of it. Not water, something thicker, almost like mud. When I touched it, the smell hit me. The same smell the house had when we first walked in. Damp soil. I wiped my hand on my jeans, disgusted. That night, while lying in bed, I heard the whispering again. Closer this time. Clearer. I couldn't understand the words, but I could hear the intent behind them. They sounded urgent, angry. I got up, turned on the lights, and walked into the hallway. Something was standing at the far end. A silhouette. Tall, wide shoulders, completely still. I froze. My throat closed. The figure didn't move, didn't sway, didn't breathe. Just stood there, a perfect shadow in the dim hall. "Hannah!" I yelled. She ran out of the bedroom behind me, half asleep. The moment her feet hit the floor, the silhouette vanished, not by stepping away, but by collapsing into the dark like smoke blown by a silent wind. "Are you okay?" "What happened?" she asked. "I saw someone," I said. "Right there," I pointed. "There's nobody here. You're just exhausted." But I wasn't imagining this. I knew what I saw and what I heard. The whispering continued every night, sometimes in the hall, sometimes outside, sometimes underneath the floorboards. I tried recording it, but the audio always came out silent, like the sound didn't want to be captured. One night, something new happened. Around 3 a.m., I heard footsteps walking across the attic above our room. Slow, heavy steps. But the attic entrance was in the hallway. We never opened it since moving in. I quietly climbed the folding ladder with a flashlight. The attic smelled strongly of dirt and something decayed. Dust danced in the beam of light. The wooden beams creaked under my weight. In the far corner, I saw it. A hole in the floorboards. Not a small crack, but a dug-out hole, like someone had carved into the wood. The dirt underneath was darker than normal soil, wet, fresh. And in the center of that hole was something wrapped in cloth, a bundle. I felt a wave of nausea roll through me. I didn't open it. I should have left it alone, but I didn't. I reached for it and lifted it slightly. It was heavier than it looked, and when it shifted, I heard something inside it clink, like bones. My flashlight flickered, and for a split second, I saw something in the corner of the attic. A face, pale, sunken, half buried in the dirt wall, eyes open, watching me. I screamed and dropped the bundle. The cloth tore slightly and something small rolled out, a human tooth. I backed away so fast I nearly fell through the attic hatch. I told Hannah everything. She was terrified, but she still clung to rational explanations. Old house, animals, squatters. But the next night destroyed any doubt she had left. We were in bed when she shot upright, gasping. I turned on the light. "I heard something," she said, "in the wall, someone whispering my name." Before I could answer, the wall behind our bed shuddered violently, as if someone inside it punched outward. I grabbed her and ran downstairs. We slept in the car that night. The next morning, we called the police. I told them about the attic, the hole, the jawbone pieces, the face. They searched the house. When they came down from the attic, the officer looked confused. "There's nothing up there," he said. "No hole, no remains, nothing." "There is," I insisted. "It's in the corner." "Sir, we checked the entire attic. It's empty." I went up to see for myself. They were right. No hole, no disturbed dirt, no bundle, nothing. It looked like a normal attic, dusty and old. We should have left right then. But moving wasn't easy, financially or otherwise. And a part of me, a stupid part, convinced myself that maybe I'd imagined more than I realized. Stress does things to your brain. That's what I told myself. The house didn't like that. The following week, something changed. The whispering stopped. The figure in the hall didn't appear. The footsteps in the attic went silent. For 2 days, the house was peaceful, too peaceful. On the third night, I woke up choking, not on air, on dirt. My mouth was filled with it, wet soil packed against my tongue, gritty and cold. I gagged and stumbled out of bed, spitting clumps onto the floor. Hannah screamed. My hands were covered in dirt up to my wrists, like I'd been digging with them. We ran downstairs, grabbing our keys. As I opened the front door, I froze. The man I'd seen by the trees was standing on our porch. Up close, he looked even worse. His skin was gray and sagging, like he'd been in the ground too long. His clothes were filthy, covered in soil. His lower jaw was missing entirely, exposing the upper row of teeth in a permanent grotesque grin. Behind him, more figures emerged from the tree line. Men and women, some missing limbs, some missing eyes, all of them moving in slow, unnatural steps toward the house. Hannah sobbed. "What do we do? What do we do?" The man on the porch lifted his hand and pointed at me, just me, with a shaking, dirt-crusted finger. My breath left my body. The whispering returned all at once, not from the hallway, not from outside, but from inside my head. Louder than ever, 1,000 angry voices speaking at once. I dropped to my knees, clutching my skull. Hannah dragged me into the car. I don't remember getting in. I don't remember turning the key. But I remember the feeling as we sped down the driveway, the figures slowly fading into the darkness behind us. We never went back. We sold the house to a developer for practically nothing. They bulldozed it weeks later. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. Even now in our new apartment miles away, I still wake up at night with dirt in my mouth. I still see the silhouette of a man standing at the foot of the bed, not moving, not breathing, just watching. And sometimes, when it's really late and the world is quiet, I swear I hear whispering through the walls. Not from this apartment, from a place I left behind. A place that never wanted me to leave. A place still calling me back. And I'm terrified that one night, when I finally fall asleep deeply enough, I'll wake up standing in that attic again, with dirt on my hands and something breathing beside me in the dark. When I bought the house on Red Willow Lane, I thought I was getting the deal of the century. A 2-story home in a quiet Massachusetts neighborhood, close enough to Boston for commuting, but far enough to offer peace and space. I had just divorced, needed a fresh start, and the house, despite being old, felt like a place where I could rebuild my life. I remember the first moment I stepped inside. The air smelled faintly like cedar, mixed with something older, something unfamiliar. Not unpleasant, just old. The realtor told me the house had been empty for 2 years. The previous owners moved out suddenly, but she didn't elaborate. I didn't care at the time. I wanted the house. I wanted a new beginning. During the first week, everything felt normal, quiet, peaceful. I worked long hours, returned home exhausted, cooked simple dinners, and explored the creaking hallways room by room. The house had character, narrow staircases, antique door frames, and a strange closet under the stairs that seemed larger on the inside than it looked on the outside. The first strange thing happened on the 8th night. I woke up to the distinct sound of footsteps downstairs. Slow, deliberate footsteps. I lay there in bed, staring at the ceiling, telling myself it was the house settling. Old wood expands and contracts. That's all it was. But something about the rhythm bothered me. Settling wood doesn't walk. I got out of bed, grabbed the baseball bat I kept for emergencies, and went downstairs. The floor felt cold under my feet even though I had heating on. The living room was empty. The kitchen was empty. The back door was locked. But as I walked back toward the stairs, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The closet door under the staircase was open. I never left it open. I kept cleaning supplies in there, nothing more. I shut the door slowly, trying not to show the house, whatever part of it was watching, that it had unsettled me. The next day, I installed cheap motion lights inside the hallway and kitchen and went to work. When I returned that evening, the hall light was on. Not flickering, fully on, triggered. Something had moved through the hallway. I tried to convince myself it was a draft or a mouse, but the lights were new, reliable, and sensitive enough that even my own walking set them off. That night, I barely slept. On the 11th night, things escalated. I was drifting off when I felt the unmistakable sensation of someone sitting on the edge of my bed. The mattress sank slightly. My eyes snapped open, heart thundering. I could see the dip in the mattress. Someone was there. I reached to turn on the lamp. The weight lifted instantly, like whatever was sitting there slid away silently. I turned on every light in the house, searched every room, checked every lock. Nothing. Nobody. But the feeling of being watched was unmistakable. It was like the walls themselves had eyes. The next morning, I noticed something new. Scratches on the inside of the stairwell closet door. Long, thin scratches. Fresh. I ran my fingers along them. The wood splintered slightly, confirming what I feared. They weren't old, and they were on the inside. Someone, or something, had scratched to get out. I called the realtor. I demanded to know why the house had been empty so long, why the previous family had left so suddenly. She sighed heavily, took a long pause, and admitted something she should have told me earlier. A boy had gone missing inside the house. I didn't understand what she meant. Missing inside the house? I asked. She explained that the family had a 7-year-old son. One night he went to play hide and seek while the parents watched TV. He never came back out. They searched the entire house, every room, every nook, every crawl space. The police did the same. No forced entry, no signs he left the property. He simply vanished. They never found a body, never found any sign of him. One moment he existed, the next he didn't. The closet under the stairs was the last place anyone saw him heading toward. I hung up, shaken. I tried to deny it, tried to rationalize it as superstition or grief making a family desperate for explanations. But that night, the closet door opened again. Only this time, something stepped out. I was lying in bed when I heard the small creak of the door hinge downstairs. It wasn't the loud creak an adult would make, it was soft, childlike. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest as I listened. Footsteps, quick, light, almost playful, ran across the hardwood floor. Far too light to be an adult. I sat up, holding my breath. Then they stopped at the bottom of the stairs. My bedroom door was open just a crack, just enough for me to see the shadows at the bottom landing. Something small stood there, its shadow too narrow, too short to be an adult. Then the footsteps began climbing the stairs. One step, another, another. Each slow, deliberate creak echoed through the silent house. I wanted to move, to run, to scream, anything. But fear pinned me down. I couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. The steps reached the top landing. Then silence. I stared at the doorway, waiting for something to appear. After a full minute of nothing, I finally gathered the courage to stand. My legs were shaking uncontrollably. I inched toward the door, listening. The hallway was dim, lit faintly by the motion light at the far end. Something moved in the corner of my eye. A small figure darted across the hall into the guest room. I swallowed hard. My hands were sweating around the bat I'd grabbed earlier. I stepped into the hallway. The air felt cold, unnaturally cold. The guest room door was halfway open. I nudged it with the bat. The door creaked slowly. The room looked empty. But the closet door in that room was ajar. Something was inside it. I heard quiet breathing, shallow, fragile. "Hello?" I whispered, hating myself for even speaking to something I couldn't see. The breathing stopped. I stepped closer. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely grip the bat. The closet was pitch black. I reached for the light switch on the wall, but before my hand touched it, something whispered from inside the closet. "Help me." The voice was small, childlike, terrified. It sounded exactly like a lost little boy. I felt tears sting my eyes. Instinctively, I wanted to help. That voice, those two words, were filled with despair. It didn't sound threatening. It sounded afraid. I flicked on the light. No one was inside. The closet was empty. But on the inside wall, scratched deep into the wood, were the words, "I can't get out." The handwriting was childish, uneven, frantic. Something inside me broke. I shut the closet door and stepped away, shaking. I couldn't stay in that room another second. I backed out, closed the door, and ran to my bedroom. I barricaded myself inside and sat awake until morning. The next day, I decided to leave the house until I could figure out what to do. I packed a bag, grabbed my keys, and headed to the front door. As I turned the handle, the door wouldn't budge. It was locked. Not the normal lock, something else. Something holding it shut from the outside. Every window was the same. I tried them all. They rattled but didn't open, as if the frames were fused to the walls. The house didn't want me to leave. I backed away from the front door, trembling. I could feel the house tightening around me, as if the walls were inhaling, drawing breath, preparing. I didn't know what it wanted, but I knew it wasn't done. That night was the worst. I was sitting at the kitchen table, holding my phone, debating whether to call the police again. But what would I tell them? That the ghost of a missing boy was haunting me? That the house had locked me in? Then I heard it, scratching. Light, repetitive scratching coming from under my feet. I looked down at the hardwood floor, and my breath froze. The boards were shifting. Something was pushing up from underneath. A hand, small, pale, covered in dirt, burst up through the floorboards, fingers curled outward, clawing at the air. I stumbled back, gasping. Another hand emerged beside it. Then the floor split open, and a small head pushed through, hair matted with soil, face pale and thin, eyes sunken and wide. The boy. His lips were cracked, but when they parted, the voice that came out was the same whisper I'd heard in the closet. I can't get out. He dragged himself upward slowly, his limbs bending awkwardly, like he hadn't used them in years. Dirt spilled across the floor. His eyes locked onto mine, pleading, desperate. I backed into the wall. "Please," I whispered, "please don't." He reached toward me with trembling hands, not aggressively, not to hurt me, but begging, terrified. "Don't leave me down there," he said. The lights flickered, the walls groaned. The house seemed to pulse around us. Suddenly, the boy's expression changed. His eyes widened in panic. He looked behind him, into the darkness of the hole he'd crawled from, and shook his head violently as if something unseen was pulling him. "No," he whispered. "No, let me go, let me..." Invisible hands grabbed him from below. He was yanked downward so fast I barely had time to react. His fingers clawed into the wood, leaving long, dragging marks as he was ripped back into the darkness. He screamed once, short, terrified, pleading, and then he was gone. The floorboards snapped back into place, sealing the hole as if it had never been there. I didn't breathe for what felt like minutes. Then, something occurred to me. Something that made my blood run cold. The scratches in the closet weren't just pleas for help. They were warnings. 3 words had been scratched lower, fainter, as if the boy had written them in his last moments of strength. "Don't stay here." At dawn, without thinking, I grabbed a dining chair and smashed a window. The glass shattered outward, cutting my arms, but I didn't stop. I climbed through the frame, tearing my clothes, and stumbled into the front yard. I never looked back. I left everything in that house, everything. I drove until my tank was empty, checked into a motel, and spent the night shaking uncontrollably. I told the police I'd been attacked by an intruder. I didn't mention the boy. I didn't mention the house. They wouldn't have believed me anyway. I never returned to Red Willow Lane. A few months later, I found a short article online. A contractor renovating the house reported finding a sealed crawl space beneath the floor, one that had never appeared on blueprints. Inside it were the skeletal remains of a child. The article said the remains were estimated to be over 50 years old. That didn't make sense. The missing boy disappeared just 3 years ago. So who did I see? Who whispered for help? Who scratched those messages? And worst of all, who pulled him back? I still wake some nights hearing scratching under the floorboards of my apartment. I know it's not real. I tell myself it can't be real. But sometimes, just before I fall asleep, I hear a small voice behind the wall. "Don't stay there." And I don't think it's talking about the apartment. I think it's talking about everywhere. Because I don't think the house wants me back. I think the thing beneath it does. And I don't think it's finished. I never believed a house could hold a grudge until I moved into the place on Wicker Lane. I'd lived in apartments my entire adult life, so buying a home, an actual home, felt like a milestone, a sign that I was finally becoming the person I had always planned to be. It wasn't anything fancy, just a 2-story suburban place built sometime in the late 70s. Beige siding, an overgrown backyard, and a price my real estate agent said was shockingly good for the area. Looking back, the price should have told me everything. I moved in the second week of October. The air was crisp and smelled of fallen leaves. Kids were decorating porches with plastic skeletons, and neighbors waved as I unloaded boxes like they had known me for years. It felt safe, friendly, exactly what I wanted after leaving a long relationship behind. I told myself, This was my fresh start. The first odd thing happened that same night. I'd intentionally kept the house empty of furniture except for a mattress on the floor, so every noise echoed. I was brushing my teeth in the upstairs bathroom when I heard footsteps walking down the hallway. Slow, deliberate, like someone pacing. I froze. The toothbrush hung from my mouth. Then the footsteps stopped right outside the bathroom door. I whipped it open and found nothing. I told myself it was the house settling, the old wooden floors expanding as the temperature dipped outside. I slept anyway, though lightly, waking several times to creaks and soft shifts of weight from somewhere in the hallway. But it was an old house, I repeated silently. Old houses had noises. You got used to them. But some noises only get louder. On my fourth day in the house, a contractor named Hayes stopped by to give me an estimate on replacing the back deck. The wood was softening and it bowed when you stepped on it. While we walked the perimeter of the house, he paused suddenly and stared at the upstairs bedroom window. "You got someone staying with you?" he asked. "No, just me." "That's so." His eyes stayed fixed upward. "Thought I saw someone watching." I followed his gaze, but the window was empty. Hayes shook it off with a grunt, scribbled something on his clipboard, and finished the estimate. But when he handed me the paper, his voice dropped low. "That window," he said, nodding upward again. "Just keep the curtains closed at night." It was an odd warning, but he didn't elaborate. When I asked if something happened with the previous owners, he shrugged like he didn't want to talk about it. Before I could push for more, he climbed in his truck and drove off. Inside, I went upstairs and walked into the bedroom he had pointed to. Empty room, blank walls, faint smell of dust and old paint. The carpet was worn down in the middle, a strange oval of darker fibers set in the otherwise faded beige, a path where someone might have paced for years. I put my foot on it and felt an odd coldness, like the air there was somehow thinner. That night I kept the curtains closed. 6 days into living there, I began waking at exactly 3:12 every morning. Not 3:10, not 3:15, always 3:12. The first night I rolled over thinking it was random. The second night I checked my phone and frowned. By the fourth, I was unsettled. It wasn't the time that woke me, it was the sensation. Someone was watching me. I'd lie there on the mattress, afraid to move, feeling it, heavy, suffocating, like someone was standing beside my bed, leaning down, close to my face. I never opened my eyes during those moments. Something deep inside me whispered that I didn't want to see what was there. After a week, I told myself to stop being ridiculous. I was stressed, tired, adjusting to a new place, so I decided to force the issue. The next time I woke at 3:12, I would open my eyes. I didn't have to wait long. That night, my eyes snapped open because the room suddenly felt colder. A stillness wrapped around me, the kind that comes right before something touches you. I took a deep breath, strained every muscle, and turned my head. No one was there, but the curtains covering the window were moving, not fluttering, not swaying gently. They were pulled tight outward at an angle, like someone behind them was holding them with both hands. Then they let go. The curtains fell perfectly still. I shot up, lunged across the room, and yanked them open. Nothing stood on the other side but the moonlit backyard, the old deck, the silent night. I slammed the curtains shut so hard the rod bent on one side. The next morning, I decided to call the previous owner. I had her number from the closing documents. Her name was Claudia, and she answered on the second ring. When I told her who I was, she went silent. "Did something happen in this house?" I asked. Another beat of silence, then she whispered, "You should have been told." "Told what? Did the agent mention my husband?" "No." "Why?" She inhaled shakily. "He died in the house, but it wasn't natural causes." I gripped the phone tighter. "What happened?" "He fell," she said, "down the stairs, broke his neck." Something about her voice felt off. "You don't sound convinced that's what happened." "Because when I found him," she said, "he was at the top of the stairs, not the bottom. His head was against the wall, hard, like he'd been pushed." A cold ripple traveled down my spine. "We moved a month later," she added. I couldn't stay another night. Do you think he's still here? I think he never left that bedroom, she whispered. The line went dead. That afternoon, I took a long look at every room in the house, trying to convince myself that trauma leaves emotional residue, not literal ghosts. People who go through tragic events feel their homes change because they themselves change. That's all it was. But the house didn't let me hold that belief for long. Around the 10th day, I came home to find all the lights on. Not just the living room light I'd forgotten to switch off earlier, but every light in the house, hallway, bathrooms, closets, even the attic. The attic freaked me out the most. I hadn't even opened it since moving in. The string light inside dangled from the ceiling hatch, swaying slightly. As though someone had just pulled it, I stood beneath the hatch, staring up. Dust sprinkled down as though disturbed. That's when I heard it, a low exhale from directly behind me. I spun around. The hallway was empty, but the air felt heavy again, charged, like static pressure before a thunderstorm. I backed away slowly until my shoulders touched the wall. I don't want any trouble, I whispered, not sure why I thought speaking aloud would help. The house answered with a soft creak from the living room. That night I slept in my car. The next morning, embarrassment hit me hard. I was a grown adult sleeping in my car because my new house made noises. I made coffee, took a shower, and forced myself to go back inside like it was any normal day. But the house felt wrong. You know how a room feels after someone angry storms out of it? That dense, agitated silence? The whole place felt like that. My real estate agent, a cheerful guy named Andrew, called later to check in. I almost didn't tell him, but something in me needed someone else to hear it. Do you know anything weird about this house? I asked. He hesitated long enough to answer me. What do you mean? Strange noises, lights turning on, footsteps. He laughed softly. It's an old house. They all do that. I pushed harder. What about the previous owner's husband? Silence. You knew, I said. He sighed. Look, officially I'm only required to disclose a death in the house if it was a homicide. And you're telling me it wasn't? They ruled it an accident, he said quickly. But you don't believe that. He cleared his throat. Let's just say the wife wasn't the only one who felt uncomfortable there. Uncomfortable how? You're not the first buyer to complain about strange activity. That sentence made my skin crawl. What happened to the others? A few backed out. One family lived there for 6 months before selling at a loss. Why? He hesitated again, then lowered his voice. The husband changed. The wife said he would stand in the upstairs hallway at night and just stare at their bedroom door for hours. He didn't remember doing it. And you didn't think to tell me any of this? You wanted a fast closing. At that price, people don't ask questions. I ended the call without thanking him. That night, something shifted in the house, something deliberate. The activity wasn't random anymore, it was targeted. When I walked past the stairs, every light downstairs blinked out at the same time. The house went completely dark except for the faint streetlight seeping through the blinds. My heart hammered in my chest. Then I heard the footsteps again, slow, heavy, coming from the top of the staircase. I stood frozen. The footsteps descended one stair at a time, boards groaning under invisible weight. I took a small step backward. The footsteps stopped, then continued faster. I bolted for the front door. My hand hit the lock. It wouldn't turn. I yanked it, twisted it, slammed my shoulder into the door. The footsteps were only seconds from reaching the bottom now. I could feel the weight of whatever was moving, angry, purposeful. Finally, the lock snapped open. I surged outside and didn't stop running until I hit the sidewalk. I turned back toward the house just in time to see the curtains of the upstairs bedroom part slightly, like someone was peeking through them. I didn't go back inside that night. I called my brother and begged him to stay with me the next day while I packed the essentials. I didn't tell him everything, only that the house freaked me out. He laughed at first, but agreed to come. When he arrived, the house seemed calm, as if nothing had ever happened. Sunlight filled the rooms, no cold spots, no footprints on the stairs, no lights behaving strangely. I started to feel foolish. Maybe I'd imagined the worst of it. Stress could do that. Moving could do that. Being alone could do that. But the house had been waiting. I was in the upstairs bedroom packing clothes when my brother called up from the bottom of the staircase. "Hey, did you close the front door?" he asked. "Yeah, why?" "Because it's open now, wide open." A knot formed in my stomach. "Did you open it?" "No, I just came in from the kitchen." I swallowed hard and said, "Stay there." I walked out of the bedroom slowly and looked down over the railing. My brother stood at the bottom, glancing between me and the front door. Then his face changed. He squinted up toward me. "Are you alone up there?" "Yes," I said. He shook his head. "Someone just walked behind you." My entire body went cold. "No one's here." "I swear I saw someone," he said. "Tall. Right behind you." I turned around slowly. The bedroom curtains were pulled open, even though I had tied them shut minutes before. A shadow stretched across the carpet. Not mine. That was enough. I grabbed my brother's arm and we ran downstairs together. The front door stood wide open, but as we passed through it, it slammed shut behind us with a force that rattled the windows. We didn't go back inside. Instead, I called the police. I told them someone was inside the house. 2 officers arrived within minutes. They swept the house top to bottom, opening closets, checking behind doors, even climbing into the attic. They found no one. But when the older officer came down from the attic ladder, he paused, biting his lip like he didn't want to say what he was thinking. Finally, he spoke. "You ever feel watched in here?" A shiver ran down my back. "Yes." He nodded slowly. "Figured. When I was up there, felt like someone was standing right behind me." The younger officer elbowed him lightly. "Come on, man. Don't start with that." "I'm serious," the older one said, eyes still fixed on me. "If you're planning on staying, I'd rethink it." I didn't need convincing. I moved out that same evening. I didn't even take everything, just what fit in my car. My brother helped load it up and I left the rest behind. But the story doesn't end there. 3 months after moving out, I got a call from my old real estate agent. He said the house had sold again. A young couple this time. He said they seemed thrilled with it. He said they moved in on a Monday. By Friday, they had already contacted him. The wife complained of waking up at exactly 3:12 every morning. The husband said he kept seeing someone standing at the top of the stairs. They wanted to know if anything had happened in the house before they bought it. Andrew asked me what he should tell them. I didn't answer right away. I pictured the house sitting quietly on Wicker Lane, curtains drawn, waiting for its new owners to settle in, waiting for night to fall, waiting for the heavy footsteps to begin their slow, familiar climb. Finally, I said, "Tell them whatever you didn't tell me." There was a long pause on his end. Then he whispered, "They won't believe it either." Maybe that's the real horror of the house on Wicker Lane. It never needed anyone to believe in it. It just needed someone to live there. And sooner or later, someone always does. I didn't even want to buy a house. That's the part that still sticks with me. I wasn't ready, not financially, not mentally, not emotionally. But when you've spent 10 years in a cramped apartment with neighbors who scream at each other through the walls and stomp around like wrestling champions, the idea of owning a quiet place of your own feels like salvation. The house on Maple Crest Drive was the first one I toured. A pale blue ranch-style home with white trim, a wide front porch, and a freshly cut lawn that didn't fit the price tag. The agent, a chipper woman named Stacy, said the sellers wanted to move quickly. I should have asked why, but I was tired of apartment noise, tired of my life feeling stuck, and the house felt peaceful when I walked in. The air was cool. The hardwood floors were smooth and clean. The living room had a big window that flooded the place with sunlight. It felt safe, friendly. I signed the papers that same week. 3 days after moving in, I started noticing the house wasn't quiet at all. The first night was uneventful, though I remember waking up several times like someone had tapped my shoulder. The second night, I heard what I thought was the fridge making a strange sound, a hum followed by a short dragging noise. By the third night, the dragging grew longer, slower, almost thoughtful. I walked into the kitchen and saw nothing out of place. But the noise wasn't coming from the fridge. It was coming from the hallway, the long hallway connecting the bedrooms to the living room. The hallway was narrow and always darker than the rest of the house, even during the day. A place that seemed to swallow light instead of reflect it. I stood at one end of it and stared. Something shifted in the dark. I flicked the switch on, illuminating the wooden floor and beige walls. Nothing was there. I told myself it was settling noises. Old houses breathe, expand, contract. But the dragging didn't sound like a house breathing. It sounded like someone pulling their feet. The next morning, while unpacking, I found something odd in the hallway closet. It was a small patch of discolored drywall, low to the ground, maybe 2 feet up. I ran my fingers over it. The texture was slightly rougher, like it had been replaced or painted over in a hurry. Behind it, something tapped once. I jerked my hand back and stared at the drywall. My pulse sped up, and for a moment I felt stupid, standing there like a kid who expected a monster to jump out. But then the logical part of my brain reminded me that houses make all kinds of internal noises, pipes, framing, electrical wiring. Just because the tap lined up perfectly under my fingers didn't mean anything. Still, I closed the closet door. Over the next week, I caught myself avoiding the hallway altogether. I'd walk fast through it or take the long route through the kitchen just to get to my bedroom. At night, I kept my door closed, even though I'd never slept with it closed before. Something about that hallway made me feel exposed, like someone was standing just out of view. One night, around 2:40 a.m., a noise woke me. A voice. A whisper so faint I first thought it came from a dream. I lay still, listening. The whisper came again, drifting through the air. Soft, slow. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Someone trying to get my attention. I sat up. The whispering stopped instantly. My room was silent, but the air felt heavy. Even the shadows seemed thicker, as if they'd shifted when I moved. I got up, opened my door a crack, and peered into the hallway. Pitch black. The whisper came again, not from the hallway, from behind me. I spun around. Nothing was there. My throat tightened. I flipped on the bedroom light. The whisper stopped immediately. The silence afterward was so complete, it felt like someone had pressed their face against mine and held their breath. I didn't sleep again that night. The next morning, I called my mom. She told me to sage the house. My best friend told me to get a carbon monoxide detector. I bought the detector. It read normal levels. That same day, my next-door neighbor stopped me while I was taking out the trash. His name was Ron, an older guy with sunspots on his arms and a permanent squint that made him look suspicious of everything. "You're new," he said. "Yeah, I moved in last week." He nodded, his eyes drifting toward my house. "Everything all right in there?" It was the way he asked it, hesitant, cautious, that made me tense. Why wouldn't it be? He stared a little too long before answering. No reason, just, folks don't stay there long. My chest tightened. Why? Is there something wrong with the house? Not the house, he said. Something in it. Before I could ask what he meant, his wife called him from their porch, and he gave me a half-hearted wave before walking away. The next night, the dragging sound returned. This time, it was unmistakably coming from the hallway. I opened my bedroom door slowly, heart pounding. The sound paused as though it heard me, then continued. My breath hitched. Someone was dragging their feet down the hallway. I whispered to myself, "You are hearing things. You are stressed." But that lie disintegrated when I saw the floorboards bend, just slightly, one by one. As if someone heavy was walking toward my room, I slammed the door shut and pressed my back against it. The dragging stopped right on the other side. silence settled, the kind of silence that hums in your ears and crawls under your skin. Then the doorknob turned, slowly, deliberately. I staggered back. My lungs struggled to expand. The knob turned again, harder this time, then stopped. I didn't breathe for what felt like an entire minute. Finally, I reached for my phone, ready to call 911, when something strange happened. The house went still. Completely still. Like whatever was outside my door had stepped away. When I finally opened the door, the hallway was empty. The floorboards were quiet. The air was no longer cold. I told myself I imagined it. I told myself stress could induce hallucinations. I told myself anything that would let me sleep again. But the house knew better. A few days later, I decided to repaint the hallway. I wanted to make it brighter, less suffocating. As I moved furniture, I noticed something odd about the baseboards. A long scratch mark ran down one side, thin but deep, like a nail or knife had dragged across it. I crouched down and ran my finger over it. The drywall patch behind me tapped again. I jerked upright. The tap came a second time, a little louder. With shaking hands, I grabbed a screwdriver and began prying the drywall patch open. The plaster cracked. A piece crumbled inward. Behind the wall was a narrow cavity, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze into. My stomach lurched. I held my phone inside the hole and turned on the flashlight. What I saw made me freeze. Scratch marks covered the inside walls, thousands of them, layer over layer, some deep enough to pull chunks of plaster free. At the bottom of the cavity sat a small object, a single, dirty house key. I backed away slowly, my heart hammering so hard I felt it in my teeth. That night, the whispering didn't wait for 2:40 a.m. It started the moment I turned off the light, a soft murmur circling my bed, slipping beneath my blanket of logic and denial. The voice was closer now, too close. I pressed my palms to my ears, but the whisper crawled under my skin like it had been waiting for me to listen. I snapped on the lamp. The whisper stopped. I kept the lamp on until morning. The next day, I drove to the county office, determined to find out who lived in the house before me. The clerk looked up the records and told me something that made my stomach drop. The house had changed owners 8 times in 13 years. That wasn't normal. I asked if anyone had died there. He hesitated, then nodded. One. A man. About 6 years ago. What happened to him? He lowered his voice. He locked himself in one of the interior walls. They said he became confused, delusional. I felt the blood drain from my face. Locked himself inside? How? They found scratch marks, like he'd been trying to get out. My hands trembled. Do you know where in the house? He checked the file. A hallway cavity, next to a closet. I left without saying thank you. When I got home, the house felt wrong, off, like someone had been inside while I was gone. The air was colder. My bedroom door was open, even though I had closed it. The drywall cavity looked wider, as if someone had tugged at the plaster. I tried to convince myself to leave, pack a bag, and stay in a hotel. But exhaustion weighed down my limbs. I sat on the edge of my bed just to breathe. The whisper came immediately. Only this time, it wasn't a whisper. It was a voice, a man's voice, clear, close, right beside my ear. Let me out. I screamed and fell off the bed. The voice grew louder, angrier. The walls shook. Books fell off shelves. My bedroom door slammed shut on its own. The voice roared through the room. Let me out! The drywall by the closet split open, and a hand reached through, pale, thin, fingernails torn. Blood dried into the creases of the skin. The hand clawed at the air like it was searching for me. I scrambled back, hitting the opposite wall. The cavity tore wider. A face appeared, sunken eyes, lips cracked, skin stretched tight over bone. It wasn't fully human anymore, not after whatever had happened inside those walls. It stared straight at me with a desperation so thick, it tasted like metal in the air. Let me out, it repeated, voice breaking. I bolted for the window, unlocked it, and climbed out onto the lawn. I didn't look back. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. I drove straight to my brother's house and stayed there for a week. When I finally worked up the courage to return with police and a contractor, the cavity in the wall was empty. No scratches, no key, no hand. Just smooth drywall, like nothing ever happened. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. The house sold again 3 months later. I didn't warn the new owners. Maybe I should have, but I don't think it would have mattered. Some houses aren't haunted. Some houses are hungry. And Maple Crest Drive has been hungry for a long, long time. If you're still here, you're brave. Support the channel with a like, comment, and subscription.